Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar organized by Tamil Nadu Teachers Training University. My name is Vijay Anand. I represent this organization called FACE, a Focus Academy for Career Enhancement. We have been training students mostly in the college space for quite some time now, since the last 10 years. We've been mainly preparing students in undergraduate and postgraduate degrees to secure employment through their campus recruitment programs. Over the last year or so, we have also been trying to help students transitioning from class 12 to college, and to that end, we got associated with the Tamil Nadu Teachers Training University, and we have already done one session on how teachers could potentially guide students to different career options a few weeks ago. So following on that, today I'm very happy to co-host this session with Think. We have three panelists from Think. I'll be introducing them to you soon. On the topic, enhancing classroom effectiveness by facilitating thinking. So the panelists are going to be Dr. KP Mohanan, who's a co-founder of Think, Aditi Ahuja, who's also from the Think team, and Ramesh B, who's a school correspondent from Chennai. And I'll be the host for today. My name is Vijay Anand. I'm part of the FACE team. Now, this session would not be possible if not for the guidance of Tamil Nadu Teachers Education University under the leadership of Professor Dr. N. Panchanatham, who's the Vice Chancellor of the university, and Professor Dr. V. Balakrishnan, who is the Registrar. These sessions are being organized on behalf of the Department of Educational Psychology, and the convener and the head of the department, Dr. M. Govindan. We also have co-organizers Dr. P. N. Lakshmi Shanmugam, Dr. V. Vasudevan, Dr. T. Sivashakti Rajamal, and Mr. S. Balamurugan. Thank you all for giving us this opportunity to interact with all the teacher education students and researchers across the state of Tamil Nadu. We hope that this session is going to be a very fruitful one, leading to many discussions and learnings moving forward. I'm now going to take the opportunity to introduce the Think team and the panelists here today. Dr. KP Mohanan is the co-founder of Think. He's an internationally well-known theoretical linguist with a passion for education. After a PhD from MIT in 1982, he taught at the University of Texas at Austin, MIT, Stanford University, and the National University of Singapore. He joined the ISER Pune faculty in January 2011, from where he retired at the end of 2016. He has made significant contributions to linguistic theory in the areas of phonology, syntax, and morphology. Along with Tara Mohanan, he was the architect of an inquiry-oriented undergraduate program in linguistics at NUS. His more recent academic interests include scientific inquiry and the nature of academic knowledge and inquiry in general against the backdrop of human beliefs. Drawing on his experience as a researcher and educationist, he is currently preoccupied with developing learning materials to nurture the capacity for critical thinking and inquiry as a means to enhance academic intelligence of learners. Welcome, Mohanan, to this panel discussion. I also have here today another person from the Think team, Aditi Ahuja. She holds an MA in elementary education from Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. Her love for learning and understanding how people learn has motivated her to work in the field of education. She has volunteered and interned with various educational organizations since 2015. In her work with Think since 2018, she has learned to overcome her fear and anxiety associated with learning. One of her aims is to work towards creating fear-free classrooms where students find a place to learn and grow. Welcome, Aditi, to this panel discussion. We also have with us another member from Think team, Ramesh B. Ramesh runs a school in Chennai where he's initiating changes to make learning more meaningful. These include initiatives to help students teach each other, class processes tuned for more thinking and learning, greater networking among teachers, and helping teachers gain exposure through ongoing learning programs. He has a range of experience from working in the tech field to volunteering for various causes of social welfare. He believes in using his life for causes that can make a difference to the world. He sees Think as a good solution to what is now ailing the school academia that has bothered him all his life, and thus volunteers his time with Think. Welcome, Ramesh, to this panel discussion. Now I'm going to hand over the discussion to Ramesh, who's going to start uh, with the proceedings. Thank you. Over to you, Ramesh.
Yes, thank you, Vijay, and a very good afternoon to all of you budding teachers and existing teachers. So today's webinar, the topic all of us know is enhancing classroom effectiveness by facilitating thinking. So before we talk about what thinking and how thinking, uh, it may be useful for us to look at why thinking. Why class effectiveness? Because all of us want to be good teachers, and good teachers, I suppose, uh, are effective in class. And I don't think any of us here don't want to be a good teacher, right? So I asked all of you, what is it that you would consider classroom effectiveness? Like, what does it mean? I'm sure most of you would say, when I teach, everybody, all my students listen to me, all my students understand what I'm teaching. They are able to answer all my questions, and they can answer all the questions in the textbook, and they're able to write the answers in the exams. They even ask me questions. We do a lot of activity in the class. There is a lot of activity-based learning in the class. So these are all things that are considered to be good classroom activity and effectiveness in the class. For some people, it could also be my students like me very much, so I should be a good teacher. I'm sure most of us would find resonance with that. But what if we are going to say that none of these may be sufficient to be called what is useful effectiveness in a classroom? Underline the useful part. Now, I'm sure some of you may not be agreeing with me on this, which is okay. And if you're one of them, today could be an opportunity for you to listen for a new possibility that could be making this webinar useful. So first thing to look at is, why should we expect a student to know all the answers and then for them to go right in the exams? Why is that we're expecting that from a student? If we actually look at it, we might see that what we think as knowledge, we seem to look at information as knowledge itself, and then that's what the entire education becomes about. The whole of education becomes about the ability to receive information and reproduce it when required. Fine, there is a purpose. Some of you may say that it is useful to score well in the exams and so to be qualified. But then the question again would be, qualified for what? So let's not get into that question. But even if we can look at this part, that information is being seen as knowledge. So really the question will be, is that kind of knowledge really useful today? Are we really in shortage of information right now? Any of us with a phone in the pocket, we have access to literally almost the entire humanity's knowledge is available to us. Ask Mr. Google or Miss Google or whoever, and we can have whatever information we want. In fact, we have too much information coming at us even without going for it. And then the problem is to which is the information should I take and which I shouldn't. So the point is for us to see there is not much value left in that ability of receiving information and reproducing it when we need it. So then the question would be, so what would be the ability that is actually useful or required for life today? If we had time, we could do some work, but I will just jump to it. Maybe the abilities of asking the right questions, looking for answers to those questions, and to be able to understand or critically evaluate all the information that we have around us and to be able to use them when required. That would ultimately amount to something as a useful knowledge. I'm saying useful because that knowledge is something that you can generate with your own thinking. That's not a knowledge which we are getting from a teacher or from a textbook. So ultimately, that gives us the ability to generate knowledge wherever we want, whenever we want. And learning for life is that's the constant which we're going to keep having. And life is going to require us to keep that learning going. And unless we have that kind of thinking happening in the class, there is not much point in the classroom effectiveness. Whatever effectiveness that we can bring into our class is not going to be really useful for the student unless it's for the teacher to feel good. Okay, my student is performing well in an exam. But for the student, what matters is what is useful for their life. And we say education should be something which makes the student not only be successful but be well in life. We see that as the purpose of education itself. Uh, I understand a lot of this may not be comfortable for many teachers. I know this from my experience of running a school for many years, about 13 years now. It's taken a lot of effort and time to get many of the teachers to be able to see this. People are open-minded, they get to see it much faster and they get willing to learn. And for some other people, it takes more time. It probably is difficult. But the point is, unless every teacher is able to see this, this is not going to happen in the class. And who's going to miss out? It's the student. So in this webinar, our intention is to give a sense of what is this kind of thinking that we think is useful or necessary in the classes. And if that can happen in this session, I think this 1 hour that we spend together will be worth it. So having said that, I think I will now invite uh, Dr. Professor Mohanan to, if I say that, he will shoot me. So I'm going to ask Mo to take over from here and throw more light on this question. What is this kind of thinking that would be necessary, useful for a student to be learning and equipping themselves for their life? Mo.
Okay, I think we need, yes, Aditi is here. We are going to take you through a number of thinking activities. So we will ask you to behave like students so that you have an experience of what it is like to think in the classroom, so you can get your students experience the same thing. So Aditi, so what should we do? What's your plan?
Okay, so today we have 3 examples that we're going to take you through to show you what are some ways in which you can try and help your students to think in the classroom. What we are going to show you is some examples and followed by some tips and strategies on what you can do in a class to help your students think and learn. Okay, so let's get started. Uh, our first example is related to the kinds of things that children see in the world around them. As we know, whenever we talk to our children in class about science, we are talking about nature and things that children see around them. So here's a question that a 3 or 4 year old might ask. Uh, she might ask that what is that bright disk in the sky that comes up on the east every day and then goes away at around 5 o'clock every day? What is it? And how do we answer this question? Mo, do you have any suggestions?
Well, I remember that when I was a child, my idea was that it is something that moves across the sky. The Earth is stationary, and the sun moves from the east to the west. But when I was in school, I was told that that's not the case. The Earth is not stationary, that the Earth rotates. I didn't fully understand the relation between my experience of the Earth being stationary and the sun moving from east to west, and my teacher telling me that the Earth is rotating, but I simply just memorized that. And it was much later that I understood the relation between the sun appearing to move from east to west and the Earth rotating. Much, much, much later. So the question is,
Right.
how do we help our students understand what the textbook is saying through thinking?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
So,
that's right. So what you just said is that children see certain things around them in the world, and they might come to certain conclusions based on what they see. So, for example, if we were to ask a 3-year-old, do you think the earth is moving around the sun? The 3-year-old might have a little difficulty understanding that, because our experience tells us that the ground that we are on is stationary, right? And that it's not moving, and that it's the sun that's moving around us. And yet, what we tell them in our textbooks or what we tell them in our explanations is that no, the earth is actually moving and the sun is stationary, which is kind of counterintuitive, but they have to memorize it anyway. So what we are going to explore is what are some of these phenomena or these things in nature that children can observe, and then try and explain those phenomena one by one. So let me give you an example. So here we have a set of phenomena right in front of us. One thing children can notice is the position of the sun, right? Now, if you notice how the position of the sun changes on a daily basis, it is that if you observe the position of the sun every hour of the day from sunrise to sunset, you have something that you will need to explain. So Mo, what is one way to explain this phenomenon that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west?
well, before that, I think I would invite people to consider the experience of day and night. There is a period of brightness and there is a period of darkness. Every day, in 24 hours, that happens. How would you explain that? Okay, one way of explaining is to say, as the textbook says, that the Earth rotates, and if there is light here, if the Earth rotates, on the side facing the sun, it'll be brightness. On the other side, it'll be darkness. But then you could also get the same effect by keeping the Earth still and the sun going around. So it's a good idea to keep both those in mind. Then you are asking the question, how do you explain the experience of the sun being in the east? So the sun appears to be in the east, or where the sun rises, and then around noon it reaches the zenith and then sets on the other side. Again, you can explain that by saying the Earth rotates, or the sun goes around the Earth. Both are valid explanations at this stage, and it's good to keep both in mind. So the question would be, what are the other kinds of phenomena that you can explain by saying that the Earth rotates?
Right. So so far what we have done is we have observed brightness in one part of the day and darkness in one part of the day, and used a certain come up with a few explanations for that. What we have also done is we have noticed the position of the sun every hour of the day from the sunrise to the sunset, and then come up with an explanation for that. Come up with two possible explanations for that, actually. Now, what if we notice something that throughout the year, I notice that the sun doesn't rise from the same point at the horizon, in that there is some shift in the point from which the sun rises. What does that mean? How would we explain that?
Now it becomes a little more interesting, because what you're saying is that if you observe the sun's position of the sunrise every day, it seems to move from north to south and from south to north, and a yearly cycle. The cycle is completed in 365 days. So how do you explain the changes in the position of the sun? The first one was daily cycle is from east to west. Now this is from north to south and south to north, shifting in this direction. Now, my experience has been, if I ask this question to most educated people, even people who have degrees in science, they don't seem to be able to explain this in terms of the idea of the Earth's rotation and revolution. Well, it's a good idea to go through this in detail, but we are going to say at this point, if you take about 15 minutes or so, we can explain this by saying the Earth rotates, but rotates on a tilted axis. And when it rotates and revolves around the sun, you get precisely this effect of the position of the sunrise shifting from north to south. But in such a short webinar as this, we won't be able to explain this in great detail.
But here on the screen, I'm showing a picture of the tilted axis of the Earth, and if we imagine the sun rays coming from the opposite direction, you could imagine that the point at which you perceive the sun to rise would change, right? Okay, so now let's look at another related phenomenon, right? We also observe shadows throughout the day, and we notice that if you notice the changes in the length and the direction of the shadow, we can do this again in two ways. One, we can do this on a daily cycle, and we can notice that the shadow is longer in the morning and in the evening, and it's shorter at noon. So how can we explain this using the theory that we've already spoken about?
Again, it's a good idea to help the kids develop this explanation themselves from two different, conceptions. One is to say that when the Earth rotates, then you can imagine, okay, I shouldn't be doing this, I should be doing this, right? And the sun is here. When the Earth rotates, first the sun's rays come slanting, and the shadows are very long. And it rotates further. This is the sun, and this is the Earth. It comes like this, and then it is perpendicular. When the sun is perpendicular to the Earth, the shadow is very short. And when the Earth rotates further, then the shadow gets longer. And also, there is a shift in the direction of the shadow. It's because there is a shift in the relative position of the sun and the Earth. But you can get exactly the same results by saying that the sun revolves around the Earth once in 24 hours. And it's a good idea to help kids explain this in terms of both these ideas, so that they'll get a sense of why it is important to conclude that it is the Earth that is rotating, not the sun revolving. You have to handle both these side by side.
Okay, and we can observe changes in the directions and the length of the shadow on a yearly cycle as well, depending on the position of the sun, right? So far what we have said is that depending on the position of the sun in the sky, we can see changes in the length and the direction of the shadows, both in one day and also in 1 year, if we observe the shadows carefully, the length and the direction of the shadows carefully. So here what we're trying to do is basically observe the phenomena that are around us, and then encourage children to come up with explanations for these phenomena, right? Now, here what we usually talk about in the textbook is one explanation for this observation, right? And often this explanation may not necessarily be complete, in that children may have to memorize some parts of it, even though they don't fully understand it. So here what we try to show from this example is that we present one way of facilitating thinking in the classroom is to present these phenomena to children and ask them how they would explain these phenomena. What might happen in this process is children might come up with alternative explanations, which do just as much of which give a sufficient explanation for the same phenomena. And those alternative explanations should also not be dismissed immediately, saying this is not the right answer. But in fact, exploring those explanations might lead us to some interesting conclusions. Would you like to add something to that, Mo?
Yeah, I was thinking, most school children understand or have seen the daily cycle effects. The sun seems, moving around and that kind of stuff. But they may not be aware of the yearly cycle. So it may be a good idea to ask them to observe the shadow of for example, the flagpole every day and check what happens to the direction of the shadow. If they observe it every day or at least once a week, they'll then notice that the shadow shifts its direction. And that also corresponds to the sun shifting the position of sunrise and sunset. They have to be told to observe that and experience it. And that's very important, so that they will start thinking about how do you explain that. All these are activities. This is just a small sample of the kind of activities that teachers can do with respect to students to develop thinking ability in students. Just a small sample. There are many more.
And even beyond, sorry, please go on.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So what I was trying to say is that along with these activities, we're also talking about general practices that a teacher can do in a classroom that can help children to develop the ability to think continuously. So for example, if we do this in a science classroom, and as our further examples will show, if we do this in all of our sessions, then children will develop or cultivate the habit of thinking and not just memorizing answers to write for the exam. And that is a part of education, real education. So now moving forward to our next example, a lot of the times children have a lot of the times children have the notion of a friend and an enemy, and these are very simple notions that they have, but oftentimes the kinds of reactions they can harbor to these words can have lasting consequences in terms of how they respond to news on TV channels or articles that they read or anything that happens in the world around us. So I think Mo has a very interesting uh, example of a session that he was a part of in conducting, in which I invite him to share the story of.
Yeah, actually, this happened in a sixth grade classroom. We were helping children develop the capacity for ethical inquiry. So I use the example of somebody killing somebody else. Let's say, call that person Zeno. Zeno kills somebody for no reason at all. And I asked the kids, is that morally right? And all the kids said, no. Why is that? That's why I said, why is that not right? And the children came up with the statement that killing is morally wrong. So I said, killing anybody? They said, yes, killing anybody. So I wrote it down on the green board. So one of the kids said, but killing enemy is right. And in fact, enemies ought to be killed. So all the students agreed, yes, we should kill all the enemies. So I wrote down, killing is not morally right, but all enemies must be killed. Wrote both. So the whole class agreed that it is so. So I asked them, do you have any enemies in this classroom? They said no. Do you have any enemies in the school? No. Do you have any enemies in Pune? They said no. In Maharashtra? They said no. So I said, you don't seem to have any enemies. Where are your enemies? So the kids said, oh, Pakistanis are our enemies. So I said, all the Pakistanis should be killed. They said yes. So I said, okay, right now as we speak, there is a school in Pakistan with 6th graders. Let's go kill all the 6th graders in that school. And they said, no, you can't. I said, are they our enemies? So they said, no, 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 children are not enemies. So I said, okay, we can go and kill all the parents of these children. They said, no, you can't. So I said, well, who are your enemies then? Your children, the Pakistani children are not enemies, their parents are not enemies. Who are your enemies? So they said, oh, the soldiers, Pakistani soldiers are enemies. I said, okay, let's go and kill all the Pakistani soldiers. And some of these children will have parents and others will have their own children. But that's okay, doesn't matter. And the children immediately said, no, you can't kill the soldiers. Because the very idea that you are causing grief to the parents and the children of the soldiers, that was not, acceptable to the children. So I said, okay, if even soldiers are not your enemies, who are the enemies? So it took some time. We gave them about 5 minutes to think through this in discussion and so on. Finally, they came up with the answer. Enemies are the people who want to kill other people. It doesn't matter which nations they belong to. If they want to kill other people, those are our enemies. So all this took about, let's say, 20 minutes to 30 minutes. But in the course of thinking through these ethical questions, I think children learned a great deal. Not necessarily for the exams, but for their life in thinking about moral issues. This was great learning.
Right. At the beginning of this example, you mentioned something called ethical inquiry. Do you want to clarify what that term means?
Ethical inquiry is thinking about ethical or moral questions. What is the right thing to do? Okay. What is morally right? That is ethical inquiry. Is it ethically right or morally right to hurt other people unnecessarily? Is it ethically right to kill? Is it ethically right to insult people? How do we behave towards fellow creatures? Those are ethical questions. And it is important that all of us learn this, to think about such issues when we are being educated, even if there are no exam questions about that.
Absolutely. And what I was going to mention is that we all have these judgments. We all have ethical judgments about what is good and what is bad. And what we are trying to do here, or what we're trying to show through this example, is that children and all of us actually need to develop the ability to think through our ethical values and the consequences of those ethical values more clearly. And these kinds of exercises where children write down their ethical value, or all of us write down our ethical value and then judge our actions or our judgments based on those values that we have written, that allows us to bring more clarity into this process. Is that right, Mo?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, this is something that we can all do in the classroom.
Yes, and definitely not just children, but even we as facilitators can learn a lot in these kinds of sessions. Right. So moving on, we saw examples of facilitating thinking in the classroom in science. We saw one in ethical inquiry. Now let's move on to mathematics, right? So one of the most common things that we learn in mathematics, as in it's common across education systems and it's taught fairly early on in school, is the definition of a straight line, right? So what is a straight line? What is a common definition that we would find in a textbook of a straight line?
I think the most common definition that school children would understand is, if you have 2 points, A and B, a straight line is the shortest path between A and B. That can be given as a definition. And from that definition, a large number of extremely interesting consequences follow. So you can ask the question. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No, please. I'm sorry. I was just agreeing with you.
You can ask questions like, can two straight lines intersect at 2 distinct points? That's an important question that we can ask, and we can prove that if you're talking about a flat geometry, a flat surface, they will not be able to intersect twice. they will be able to intersect only once. But if it is spherical geometry is the geometry that Einstein used, like geometry of a spherical surface, two straight lines can intersect twice. I don't know if you have the time to go through that. Do we have the time to go through that?
We'll do it. We'll do a quick example. So to start right from the beginning, would this be an example of a straight line? This is a sheet of paper that I have, and I have marked 2 points, and this would be the shortest distance from point A to point B, which is the definition of a straight line, right? Now, what you mentioned is this is a straight line on a flat surface, right? Now, what if I did this to this sheet of paper, where I rolled it up into a cylinder, right? Now, what I have is a line that runs across the cylinder and comes back there. So, Mo, would we call this a straight line?
Of course, by definition, it is a straight line. The line hasn't curved, but the surface has curved. When the surface curves, the line remains straight, but it looks like a circle. Now, the same thing applies to spheres as well, because another way of thinking about a straight line is there is a point that is moving in the same direction. Imagine that the point is an ant. So on that line that you drew, if an ant is crawling in the same direction without changing direction, the ant will come back to the same point. Not if it's a flat surface, right? Imagine a sphere. If an ant moves, let us say, from the equator towards the North Pole, moves like that, and then after North Pole, it'll continue moving, and after some time, it'll come back to the same point. So on a spherical surface, a straight line meets itself, always meets itself. That is never true on a flat surface. And with a little bit of thinking, you can also figure out that any two straight lines will intersect each other at 2 points on a spherical surface. Now, this is pretty startling, but it is important to understand that in order to understand spherical geometry. And notice that spherical geometry is the geometry of relativity theory. If you have heard about Einstein's relativity, he used spherical geometry. And most importantly, the GPS on your telephone works because of spherical geometry. Otherwise, it wouldn't work because of relativity theory. So this has huge applications.
Of course. So the applications of the theory are huge, but when we're talking about this in a classroom, right, we probably wouldn't venture into those aspects necessarily. So
no, but
yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, of course, you don't talk about relativity theory to 6th graders or 8th graders. Definitely not. But it may be a good idea to hint that there is something called spherical geometry in addition to Euclidean flat geometry, to get a sense of, for them to get a sense of what it is. And then to say, look, it is because of that we now have GPS. GPS, I'm pretty sure they would know. Most people have smartphones. So to connect that idea, geometry, to the technology, even though they do not understand the relativity theory in full detail, to be aware of such things, that's important. And also, to the extent they can think through these issues in, for example, a cylindrical surface and a spherical surface and other kinds of surfaces, that expands their imagination. It's very important to expand people's imagination through mathematics. Mathematics is not mere calculations. It is also imagining, thinking, reasoning, a whole bunch of other things. And that's very important in the classroom.
Absolutely. And in fact, I love the analogy of the ant walking along different surfaces, and that being a useful way of helping children to imagine the various types of definitions of a straight line. Like, for example, if an ant is climbing a wall, and so far it's on the ground, and then it takes a turn and it starts climbing upwards along the wall. Is it walking in a straight line? Would we still call that a straight line?
That's right? A very interesting question.
And similarly, so I have this small cube over here, And I have marked 2 points on this cube. I have marked point A over here and point B over here, right? I hope you can see it. Oops. Yeah. So what if an ant was to take this path and walk through point A like this and reach point B? Is that a straight line? So these are different ways in which we can help offer children the chance of thinking through the definitions that they come across in the textbook and go beyond them in a certain sense and expand their imagination to move beyond the textbook. So now we've seen a few examples, but what are some general practices that you can follow? As we mentioned earlier, there are some general ways in which you can learn to facilitate thinking. So we'll do that. We go through quick 5 tips of good practices in the classroom that can help you facilitate thinking. Right. So practice 1. Any question that can be answered as soon as it is asked is simply a regurgitation question. So do not ask questions to which children already know the answers. Exam questions where are one such type of question. Often we ask children the kinds of questions to which they memorize the answers from textbooks, to which we expect them to say the right answer. But oftentimes children, when children experiment and even give us the wrong answer, it shows that they are trying and they are thinking. Right, Mo? Is there anything you would
Yeah,
like to add?
absolutely. Like, for example, the question that you raised about the cube, is that a straight line? Now, I don't think anybody, most people who have degrees in science and so on can answer that question immediately. So they may have to go home, think about it. They might take about 5 minutes, 10 minutes a day. Give them time to think. Thinking requires time. And so that means if you ask them a question for which they already know the answer, they will repeat the answer, they will not think. So you have to change the classroom practice. So this is the good
Right,
practice.
absolutely. Okay, great. So something similar to related to practice 1 is ask questions to which answers are not found in textbooks or class notes.
Right. So in fact, all the
Why
questions
should
that
we
we
do
raised, sorry, all the
that?
questions that we raised, discussed today were of that type, right? For example,
Yes.
how do you explain the difference in the location of the sun over the year? The most textbooks may not give you the answer, especially the one, can 2 straight lines intersect twice? I don't think there is any school textbook that answers the question. So try to find out questions for which there are no textbook answers, and let the children discover the answers through their own thinking. Even if it takes 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 2 hours, or 2 weeks, it doesn't matter.
Yes, that's right. So moving on. Practice 3, design questions that require thinking.
Yeah. In fact, that we have been saying that throughout. All these examples are of that type. So we can move on to, yeah.
Yeah. So what I want to add is that these are topics that children learn at some point in their school life, but the tasks that are designed around them are what really allow children to start thinking, right? So now that brings us to practice 4, which is give students enough time for thinking before they answer questions. Let students discuss questions in buzz groups and come up with group answers instead of individual answers.
Yeah, this is actually very important, because quite often a teacher asks a question, and by the time the question is finished, students raise their hands and give the answer. Now that obviously means they have not thought. So if you ask them questions that require thinking, then obviously you cannot expect them to answer immediately. So typically give them a couple of minutes to think silently. You should tell them, do not speak, think silently. And then their thinking can be enhanced if they talk to each other. So they form small buzz groups or small groups, discuss it, and each group comes up with one answer. The advantage of that is they learn how to teamwork. Instead of competing with one another in the team, students are learning how to collaborate. and collaboration is extremely important for thinking. We are changing their culture by doing this. So this is a very important practice.
Great.
Yeah. In
So
fact, you mentioned collaboration. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
yeah. Yeah, that's a perfect segue into the final practice that we have to recommend, which is that encourage children to collaborate with each other and not compete. And that when children are focused on winning a competition or getting the highest marks or ranking first, they often their focus tends to shift and they do what it takes to win the competition rather than really think through whatever it is that they're speaking. All right.
We should wrap up
So
now and
yes, yes.
yeah.
I was just going to say that we have questions now. We have a few questions ready. So Ramesh, would you like to add any comment before we move on to the questions?
What I would say is, see, the normal tendency for what happens in a class is there is a syllabus given in a textbook, and there is a habit or a given condition that we start from the beginning and go till the end to complete some syllabus. And that's where I think this whole purpose gets missed out, and the need for thinking doesn't arise. Because this whole system requires only existing questions to be answered. The textbook gives questions and the teachers takes those questions, and so it requires that extra effort from the teacher to let that the textbook be. The textbook can give a framework as to what subjects to what topics to cover, but it takes that extra, I would say, commitment to the student's life and the student's education to be to be able to step out of that stream and put this extra effort. I'm not saying extra effort in terms of more work to do, but within the same time, I think we can reallocate time such that there is the required syllabus work also gets done, and so what is more meaningful, useful also gets to happen.
Okay.
I'm sure this is a question which is there for every teacher. How do you manage both? Because it looks like going out of the way. So I just thought I'll add that in.
Right. Okay. So we have quite a few questions and we will try to answer as many as we can. So I request both Mo and Ramesh to keep their answers as brief and concise as possible. So let's start with the first question from Revati, who says, do we use mathematical ideas like differentiation, integration, and scientific conclusions in everyday life? So in some ways, I feel like Revati is asking, what is the value of math and science beyond application? So would you want to talk about that more?
Yeah, the way math is normally taught, it is taught as remembering formulae, equations, and applying them to make calculations at a high speed. But there is this, of course, the calculations are important, formulae are important, mathematics, but mathematics is also something that allows you to think. In fact, mathematics is the best case for teaching students how to reason, how to visualize, how to imagine, how to be precise. These are not normally part of the textbook, normally part of the classroom teaching. So we would suggest that we develop those abilities in students, and then they will be transferred to domains outside of mathematics. We don't have a great deal of time to illustrate this, but if you look at the websites that we have given, there are lots and lots of examples on how you can use mathematics to develop thinking abilities that are valuable outside of mathematics in other subjects, as well as in your personal life, professional life, and so on. For that, math is a great subject.
So in other words, what you're saying, if I've understood it correctly, is that differentiation and integration itself may not have necessary applications for everyone in life, but that the process of learning the concepts or thinking through the thinking that is required to do integration and differentiation or any other, or understand any other mathematical concept clearly, is what is valuable and can be used beyond mathematics. Ramesh, did you
for that math has to be approached differently? Sorry.
Yeah, I probably want to say the same thing. So I think what would be useful is in the classroom, if all these topics are not taught as a subject, so it could be learned as a way of thinking. There's a mathematical way of thinking, a scientific way of thinking. If that way of thinking can be learned by the students, that is more important for a school student than the subject itself. Like probably differentiation, if they go to engineering, it may be useful there. But in the school level, lot of the topics may not have immediate relevance. But like Aditi said, it might help in a certain kind of thinking there, and uh, that is worth going through the process. So even though the teacher has to do the same content, I think the context, if it shifts for the teacher, that this is the reason I'm taking this, not for the student to be able to complete this sum and get the right answer, but to develop a certain way of thinking through it. That would be the
Absolutely.
real purpose of this.
Yeah, thank you. So the next question is from Ganeshan, and he asks, we already use PPTs, models, and charts. For science subjects, are there other means to make the class more lively? So here, what I would like to start by saying is that uh, what were the activities that we discussed today aiming at? Were they aiming at the class to become more lively? Uh, Not exactly. Would the class have become lively during these activities? Quite possible that there would be animated discussions between children and teachers during such activities. But the goal of the class was to develop thinking abilities in children. And I think that's where the goals and the means, the distinction between those two become important. Mo, would you like to say something about that?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, when I teach, whether in school or in university, I hardly ever use PPTs. I rather use the whiteboard because that lends itself to learning. PPTs are good for lecturing, but not for teaching. I never use PPTs for teaching. PPTs are only for lecturing. And it's not clear that when I lecture, students learn anything at all. I have the satisfaction of delivering a good lecture, but I don't think they understand. Thinking is when you ask a question and the student's mind works on it. And the student's mind works after leaving the classroom. When they're lying in bed, they are thinking about the question. When they're having a shower, they're thinking about the question. When they're riding a bicycle, they are thinking about the question. So their mind is preoccupied with the problem that we have set. How do you ask those questions? Okay, it is not easy to find those questions, but if you find those questions, then you are triggering the process of thinking. You're lighting a fire, a small fire in a forest, but it will become a huge forest fire. That's what we need to do.
I also would
Right.
like to add something about this fun and lively class. Every teacher likes to have the class be lively and fun, but the question is that the result required? Is that the outcome of the class required, or is it a process by which you have another outcome? You have a certain specific learning outcome, and we think if the class can be done in a fun way, lively, and get to the learning outcome, that was an effective class. Not if
Yeah.
not the point of the class is not just to make it lively and fun. Then we lose out on the very goals,
Yeah.
like as you said,
Yeah.
that you can have a great fun class, but no worthwhile learning outcome achieved is a pointless class.
Yeah, you're right. If you crack lots of jokes, the class will be funny. But did you learn anything? So it has to be the case that you learn something valuable and interesting, not just fun. It has to
Mm-hmm.
go beyond fun. Class should be
Absolutely.
enjoyable, right? Class should be enjoyable, but not it. You should also learn something valuable. That you cannot do
Okay.
simply by cracking jokes. Yeah,
Fun can be the means, not the end.
yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Absolutely. I think that sentence summarizes it. So we'll
Yeah.
move to the next question. Uh, Vigneshwar asks, what is the appropriate age for these kinds of activities in the classroom?
Age 2 onwards. In fact, my grandson started these things when he was at age 3. So did my granddaughter. But of course, the activities have to be simple enough such that 3-year-olds can handle this. And all the
Right.
way from age 3 to age 100. There is no, but of course, the difficulty level would change. The kinds of things that I would engage with, I don't think an undergraduate student can engage with. And the kinds of students that an undergraduate student can engage with, primary school learner cannot engage with. So you have to select appropriate tasks.
Right. The examples that we use today, I think, would work best for middle school children, anywhere between primary and middle school. And yeah, I mean, you could try these out depending on what kinds of things, based on what you gauge the classroom to be adequate for. Since we're running out of time, I'll take one last question and hand over to Vijay. But I would like to say that the answers, we will answer the rest of these questions and post it on our Think website, and we can find a way to share the link to those answers with you. So the final question that I will be taking is from Aarti, who asks, how can teachers develop their thinking ability in order to guide children and facilitate the class?
I guess they have to go through these activities themselves. And the only one way for them to do that is to join our course, Enquiry and Integration in Education, that we run every year. But now this year it's too late. We have already started the course. If you want to develop your thinking abilities, join this course next year. That would be the simplest way of doing it.
Yeah, there are also. Sorry, yes, Ramesh, please continue.
You complete what you say.
Okay, I was trying to point to the fact that our YouTube channel has several videos. In fact, it has videos with some sessions that we've done with 9th graders, and several other videos where we demonstrate such lessons and even talk about the philosophy or the general value system behind such educational practices. And you can also find that on all of our social media pages and on our website.
Yeah, and what I was going to add is probably the best access that we have for this kind of thinking ability to learn this kind of ability is the IIE course, but perhaps not every teacher might have access to it. So what we do in our schools, I just thought I'd share that every evening the teachers spend time together to learn from each other. So each day they share their class processes. One teacher takes a class and other people watch it, and a context of this thinking is created for them. So everybody looks through this lens called, is thinking happening over here? And that sharing can itself to some extent create that ability by learning from each other. There are certain things which we can't learn. We are through time. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Mo, Aditi, and Ramesh, for a very lively discussion. I'm sure we are leaving the audience with a lot of insights which they can take home and work on their, profession and practice as a teacher. So for further inquiries, please, check out the YouTube channel of Think, where you could potentially, experiment with all the new teaching methodologies that we have briefly touched upon today. And the questions that remain unanswered, we'll be posting it and sharing through the Think website and the YouTube channel. If any of you joined midway through this session, you will all get a recording of this session emailed to you tomorrow as part of the follow-up email, and you'll be able to access the full recording of this session in case you want to share it with someone or in case you want to view this once again. I also wish to thank Vaidish, Tara, and Madhav, who have been in the background trying to curate questions. And I'd also like to thank the organizers at Tamil Nadu Teachers Education University for letting us have this session with all the students and faculty across Tamil Nadu. Thank you, everyone, once again for participating. Most importantly, the audience for taking the time out and joining us during this session. We wish to interact with you more soon. Until then, please check out our YouTube channels. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.